In the dimly lit streets of Victorian England, where coal smoke painted the sky and industrial grime coated every surface, personal cleanliness became both a practical challenge and a moral battleground. The era's relationship with hygiene reflected its stark class divisions and evolving social attitudes, creating a fascinating tapestry of practices that ranged from primitive to surprisingly sophisticated. As Charles Dickens vividly depicted in Oliver Twist, the squalid conditions of London's East End were in sharp contrast to the pristine appearances maintained in the fashionable West End, where even the air seemed cleaner. For the working class, the simple act of bathing was a luxury rarely afforded. In London's overcrowded tenements, entire families shared a single cold water tap, if they were fortunate enough to have running water at all. The Saturday night bath became a weekly ritual for those who could manage it, with family members taking turns in the same water, starting with the father, followed by the mother, then children in descending age order. This practice gave rise to the popular phrase, "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," as by the time the youngest child's turn came, the water was so murky that one literally might not see the baby in it. Public bathhouses, which emerged in the 1840s, offered respite for some urban dwellers, charging a penny for a cold bath or tuppence for hot water. The Victoria Baths in Manchester, opened in 1906 and dubbed Manchester's Water Palace, exemplified the grandeur these institutions could achieve. These establishments served as more than mere cleansing stations. They became social hubs where communities gathered and information flowed as freely as the water. The wealthy, meanwhile, enjoyed the privilege of copper or tin baths in dedicated bathrooms, attended by servants who laboured to carry dozens of buckets of heated water upstairs. Lady Montagu's letters from 1869 describe her morning ritual, noting how her lady's maid would prepare rose-scented water and lay out fine Turkish towels, a stark contrast to the harsh reality of working-class hygiene. Queen Victoria herself set a royal example with her elaborate marble bathroom at Windsor Castle, installed in 1850, which featured one of the first shower mechanisms in Britain, a cascade of water released by pulling a chain. The soap industry underwent a remarkable transformation during this period. Early Victorian soap was a crude affair, made from animal fat and lye, harsh enough to remove several layers of skin along with the dirt. Innovative manufacturers like Andrew Pears revolutionized the market in the 1860s with his transparent soap, specially formulated to be gentler on delicate skin. The famous Pears soap advertisements, featuring cherubic children and glamorous women, became iconic representations of Victorian marketing. In 1789, Pears hired actress Lily Langtry as the first celebrity endorser in advertising history, paying her £100 to claim she owed her complexion to Pears soap. The middle and upper classes embraced these new luxuries, while working families often relied on homemade alternatives, including vinegar rinses and oatmeal scrubs that had been passed down through generations. An 1875 household manual by Mrs. Beeton provided recipes for homemade soap using rendered fat and caustic soda, a dangerous process that occasionally resulted in serious burns. Clothing cleanliness became a visible marker of social status, leading to ingenious adaptations. Detachable collars and cuffs, which could be cleaned separately from shirts, allowed even modest clerks to maintain an appearance of respectability. The invention of the detachable collar by Hannah Lord Montagu in Troy, New York, in 1827, quickly spread to Victorian Britain, revolutionizing men's fashion and hygiene practices. Women's elaborate dresses, which could weigh up to 14 pounds, were rarely washed in their entirety. The famous fashion magazine Godey's Lady's Book advised in 1859 that a good silk dress should last 20 years or more with proper care. Instead, protective undergarments absorbed body oils and sweat, being changed and washed more frequently, while the outer garments were spot-cleaned and aired. The phrase, airing one's dirty laundry, originated during this period, referring both literally to the practice of hanging clothes to air and metaphorically to revealing private matters publicly. Hair care presented its own challenges. The Victorian beauty ideal of long, lustrous locks confronted the practical difficulties of washing hair in an era before running hot water was common. Many women relied on dry shampoo made from flour or starch, brushed through the hair to absorb excess oil. The celebrated actress Sarah Bernhardt popularized the use of rice powder as a dry shampoo in the 1880s. The hair tonic market boomed, with preparations containing everything from bear grease to coconut oil, promising to maintain healthy, manageable hair. Macassar oil, immortalized in Dickens's writings, and so popular, it led to the invention of anti-macassars, chair covers to prevent the oil from staining furniture, was a mixture of coconut oil, palm oil, and ylang-ylang flowers. Oral hygiene practices would horrify modern dentists. While toothbrushes existed, they were expensive luxuries until late in the century. The first mass-produced toothbrush was manufactured by William Addis in England around 1780, using cattle bone handles and swine bristles. But they remained costly items until the 1850s. Many people cleaned their teeth with homemade concoctions involving chalk, charcoal, or even crushed cuttlefish bones. The popular cherry toothpaste of the 1850s, despite its appealing name, contained such ingredients as chalk, charcoal, and honey, a recipe that likely contributed more to decay than prevention. Queen Victoria's dentist, Edwin Truman, created a special tooth powder for her in 1847 containing ground cuttlefish bone, sodium bicarbonate, and myrrh, a formula that became fashionable among the upper classes. Perhaps most revealing was the era's complex relationship between cleanliness and morality. Medical professionals like Dr. James Johnson warned in medical journals about the dangers of excessive washing, claiming it weakened the constitution and invited disease. His 1837 treatise, The Economy of Health, advised that too frequent ablutions of the whole body are decidedly injurious. Yet simultaneously, religious and social reformers preached that cleanliness was indeed next to godliness, particularly for women who were expected to maintain both their personal hygiene and their household's moral purity. Florence Nightingale, in her 1859 Notes on Nursing, emphasized the connection between cleanliness and health, writing, "Every nurse ought to be careful to wash her hands very frequently during the day." The urban-rural divide added another layer of complexity. Country dwellers often maintained traditional practices, such as using rainwater for washing and herbs for personal freshness, while city residents increasingly adopted new commercial products and practices. In rural Yorkshire, documented by social researcher Henry Mayhew in 1851, families still used centuries-old recipes for herbal soap made with rosemary and lavender. This divide reflected broader tensions between traditional ways of life and the modernizing influence of industrialization. As the century progressed, scientific understanding of disease transmission gradually influenced hygiene practices. The cholera epidemics of the 1830s and 1850s eventually led to improved water systems and a greater emphasis on cleanliness in public health initiatives. Dr. John Snow's groundbreaking work linking cholera to contaminated water in London's Broad Street in 1854 marked a turning point in understanding the relationship between hygiene and health. Yet change came slowly, and many Victorian hygiene practices persisted well into the early 20th century, leaving an indelible mark on social history. As social reformer Edwin Chadwick noted in his 1842 report, the annual loss of life from filth and bad ventilation is greater than the loss from death or wounds in any wars in which the country has been engaged in modern times. The Thames Revenge: How London's Great Stink Revolutionized Urban Sanitation. In the sweltering summer of 1858, London faced an environmental crisis so severe that it threatened to bring the world's most powerful empire to its knees. The Thames, once celebrated as the lifeblood of the city, had become a toxic soup of human waste, industrial effluent, and rotting organic matter. This was the culmination of decades of negligent urban planning and explosive population growth, creating what would become infamously known as the Great Stink. The satirical magazine Punch captured the zeitgeist with a cartoon titled Father Thames introducing his offspring to the fair city of London, depicting the river as a filthy old man surrounded by diseases in human form. Michael Faraday, the renowned scientist, had warned of this impending crisis in 1855 after dropping white papers into the Thames to demonstrate its opacity, describing the river as an opaque, pale brown fluid in a letter to the Times. Before this crisis reached its peak, London's waste management system was primitively medieval. The city's 3 million inhabitants relied on a haphazard network of cesspools and poorly maintained sewers that often leaked into the groundwater. An estimated 200,000 cesspools lurked beneath London's streets, their contents regularly overflowing into basements and foundations. The situation in St Giles, one of London's poorest parishes, was particularly dire, with reports from social reformer Henry Mayhew describing basements perpetually filled with sewage that residents had to traverse on makeshift boardwalks. The night soil men, workers who manually emptied these cesspools under cover of darkness, faced nightly peril for a few shillings' wage. One particularly tragic incident in 1850 saw 3 workers die of foul air while cleaning a cesspool in Spitalfields. These unfortunate labourers, armed with nothing more than shovels and buckets, would descend into the putrid depths to remove human waste, often suffering from toxic fumes that claimed several lives each year. The famous diarist Charles Greville noted in 1849 that these men were the unsung heroes of London's underworld, performing tasks too horrible to contemplate. The situation was exacerbated by the introduction of the water closet, flush toilet, in the 1820s, patented by Alexander Cumming in 1775, but popularized by George Jennings during the Great Exhibition of 1851. While this innovation seemed like progress for wealthy households, it overwhelmed the existing infrastructure by flooding already strained cesspools with additional water. By 1850, London had 200,000 water closets, flushing 250,000 cubic meters of water daily into a system designed for dry waste. The contents inevitably found their way into the Thames, the same river that provided drinking water for much of the population. As journalist Henry Mayhew noted in 1849, the Thames is literally a dead well into which all the filthy sewage of London is poured, to be thrown back again upon the town every tide. The river became so polluted that by 1856 it was reported that even the copper bottoms of boats were corroding at an unprecedented rate. The summer of 1858 brought unprecedented temperatures, with thermometers regularly recording 48 degrees Celsius, 118 degrees Fahrenheit in the sun. The Thames, carrying the waste of millions, began to ferment. The stench was so overpowering that Parliament, situated alongside the river, attempted to function with curtains soaked in chloride of lime to mask the smell. The clerk of the House of Commons, Charles Barry, recorded purchasing £2,000 of lime chloride and 200 dozen bottles of disinfectant fluid in a desperate attempt to make the building habitable. Benjamin Disraeli, during a notable speech, dramatically fled the chamber, describing the stench as a Stygian pool that produced an intolerable effluvium. The Times reported that the smell was so powerful it caused strong men to retch openly in the streets. The prevailing medical theory of the time, known as the miasma theory, held that diseases were spread by foul air rather than germs. Leading proponents like Dr. William Farr and Florence Nightingale championed this theory, with Nightingale writing in her 1859 Notes on Nursing that the first rule of nursing is to keep the air the patient breathes as pure as the external air. While this theory was incorrect, it ironically helped drive positive change. Dr. John Snow had already made the groundbreaking connection between cholera and contaminated water during the 1854 Broad Street outbreak, where he traced the source to a single infected water pump at 40 Broad Street in Soho. His meticulous door-to-door investigation and innovative spot map, showing clusters of cholera cases around the pump, laid the foundation for modern epidemiology. Despite facing ridicule from the medical establishment, Snow's removal of the pump handle famously halted the outbreak that had killed 616 residents in just 10 days. Engineer Joseph Bazalgette born in Enfield in 1819, emerged as London's unlikely hero. His ambitious plan to construct 82 miles of main intercepting sewers and 1,100 miles of street sewers was approved with unprecedented speed. The project required 318 million bricks, 880,000 cubic yards of concrete, and 670,000 cubic yards of hand-excavated earth. The Victoria Embankment, one of his major works, not only housed sewers, but created new public spaces and underground railway lines. Bazalgette's design incorporated enough foresight to accommodate London's growth well into the 20th century, with the main sewers built to handle double the then current population's needs. His motto, "We're not just building for today, we're building for the future," proved prophetic. His sewers still serve London today. The project, costing £6.5 million, equivalent to over £500 million today, represented one of the most ambitious civil engineering projects of the 19th century. The transformation of urban sanitation extended beyond London's borders. Cities across Britain and Europe began implementing similar systems. Manchester's engineering feat of the Thirlmere Aqueduct, completed in 1894, brought clean water from the Lake District over 96 miles away through a gravity-fed system that required no pumping stations. The project, costing £1.5 million, sparked protests from early environmentalists like John Ruskin, who objected to the industrialisation of the Lake District. Paris underwent its own transformation under Baron Haussmann, with engineer Eugene Belgrand designing a modern sewerage system that became a tourist attraction, complete with guided boat tours through the larger tunnels. Victor Hugo described these sewers in Les Miserables as the conscience of the city, where all drains converge and all social questions meet. The Industrial Revolution's rapid pace had created unprecedented environmental challenges. Factory chimneys belched black smoke into the sky, creating what became known as pea supers, fog so thick and polluted it could barely be seen through. The worst recorded instance, the Great Smog of 1952, would later kill an estimated 12,000 Londoners. Charles Dickens vividly described this in Bleak House, smoke lowering down from chimney pots, making a soft black drizzle with flakes of soot in it as big as full-grown snowflakes. The Leeds Mercury reported in 1845 that local sheep had turned black from industrial soot, while in Manchester, the famous scientist Robert Angus Smith identified acid rain in 1852, coining the term that would later become central to environmental discourse. The first environmental movements began to emerge in response, with the formation of the Manchester Association for the Prevention of Smoke in 1842, marking one of the earliest organised efforts to combat industrial pollution. Led by physician Peter Roget, famous for his thesaurus, the group successfully lobbied for the first smoke abatement legislation in 1843. Similar organisations sprang up in other industrial cities, with the Glasgow Association achieving notable success in reducing factory emissions through the introduction of more efficient furnaces. The impact of these sanitation reforms was profound and measurable. London's cholera epidemics, which had claimed 14,137 lives in 1849 alone, became increasingly rare. The last major outbreak in 1866 was confined to the East London district of Bromley by Bow, which hadn't yet been connected to Bazalgette's new sewer system, providing stark evidence of the project's effectiveness. Dr. William Farr, a pioneering epidemiologist, documented a dramatic decrease in waterborne disease deaths in the decades following the sewer system's completion, with typhoid fever cases dropping by 75% between 1869 and 1891. Life expectancy in London rose from 37 years in 1850 to 50 years by 1900, with much of this improvement attributed to better sanitation. The Great Stink of 1858 marked a turning point in urban development, demonstrating that cities could no longer ignore the environmental consequences of industrialization and population growth. The crisis led to the birth of modern civil engineering and public health infrastructure, setting standards that would influence urban planning worldwide. As the Times noted in 1860, "The Thames is now cleaner than it has been for centuries. London may yet set an example to the world in the science of city sanitation." Benjamin Ward Richardson, in his utopian vision Hygiene, City of Health, would later write that the reformation of London's sewers marked the beginning of a new era in which science and engineering would combine to create cities worthy of civilization. From miasma to microbes, the battle that changed medicine forever. In the dimly lit wards of London's St Bartholomew's Hospital in 1847, a scene unfolded that would have horrified modern medical professionals. Surgeons moved from patient to patient wearing blood-encrusted aprons they considered badges of honor, using unwashed instruments, and operating with hands that had merely been wiped clean on their coats. These same hands might have recently conducted an autopsy or treated gangrenous wounds. The renowned surgeon Robert Liston, famous for performing the fastest amputation in history, under 30 seconds, would often hold his bloody knife between his teeth during procedures while working at University College Hospital. At Edinburgh Royal Infirmary, James Syme would proudly display his surgical coat, stiff with years of accumulated blood and pus, as a testament to his experience. The results were predictable, yet, at the time, mysterious. Up to 80% of surgical patients developed post-operative infections, and nearly half of them died. The Scottish surgeon James Simpson noted in 1847 that a man laid on the operating table in one of our surgical hospitals is exposed to more chances of death than the English soldier on the field of Waterloo. The situation in maternity wards was equally grim. At Vienna General Hospital's first obstetrical clinic, the mortality rate for new mothers reached a staggering 18% in 1846, primarily due to puerperal fever. The second clinic, run by midwives, had a death rate of only 2%, a discrepancy that tormented Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis. His breakthrough came when his colleague, Jakob Kolečka, died after cutting himself during an autopsy. Kolečka's symptoms matched those of women dying in childbirth. This led Semmelweis to implement mandatory hand washing with chlorinated lime solutions, reducing mortality rates to below 2%. Yet his findings were ridiculed by the medical establishment, particularly by Charles Meigs of Philadelphia, who famously declared that doctors are gentlemen and gentlemen's hands are clean. Semmelweis died in 1865 in a Vienna asylum, possibly from injuries inflicted by guards, his revolutionary ideas rejected by his peers. Only years later did Louis Pasteur's work explain why Semmelweis had been right all along. Hospitals of the era were known as houses of death rather than healing. The Hôtel Dieu in Paris, one of Europe's oldest hospitals, routinely packed 6 patients into beds designed for 2, with different diseases mixing freely in the poorly ventilated wards. In 1788, Jacques Tennant documented that the hospital had 1,200 beds, but often housed over 3,500 patients, with some forced to sleep on heaps of straw on the floor. A contemporary account described the air as so putrid that it condensed on the walls, running down in fetid drops. At London's St Thomas's Hospital, surgeon John Flint South recalled in 1840 that the same sponge was used to clean wounds of all patients in a ward, spreading infection from one to another. The situation was so dire that many poor patients preferred to die at home rather than seek hospital treatment. Charles Dickens wrote in Martin Chuzzlewit that hospitals were places where people were sick and dying in scores, where visitors fell sick and were carried out dead. The prevailing medical wisdom still clung to the ancient theory of 4 humours and the belief that diseases spread through miasma, bad air. Dr. Benjamin Rush, a prominent American physician and signer of the Declaration of Independence, continued to advocate bloodletting well into the 1790s, claiming to have removed 5 quarts of blood from yellow fever patients. This began to change when Louis Pasteur, working in his modest laboratory at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris during the 1850s, proposed that microscopic organisms caused food spoilage. His experiments with swan-necked flasks, definitively disproved spontaneous generation in 1861. The scientific community was skeptical. Sir Henry Akeland of Oxford declared, "The idea that our noble science should be reduced to studying invisible animalcules is absurd." Even the esteemed medical journal The Lancet dismissed Pasteur's ideas as Germanic theoretical speculation in 1863. Joseph Lister, inspired by Pasteur's work while serving as a young surgeon at Glasgow Royal Infirmary, made his breakthrough in surgical antisepsis. The hospital's surgical ward was notorious for its hospital gangrene, so severe that the lime-washed walls had turned black with infection. Noting that compound fractures, where bone-pierced skin, had an 80% mortality rate while simple fractures healed well, he theorized that environmental contamination was the difference. His first success came in March 1865 with 11-year-old James Greenlees, who had suffered a compound fracture when a cartwheel crushed his leg. Using carbolic acid spray during and after surgery, Lister saved both the boy's life and his leg. The case was published in The Lancet in 1867, but met with considerable skepticism. American surgeon Samuel Gross dismissed it as the favorite theory of the eccentric surgeon across the Atlantic. Florence Nightingale transformed hospital care despite her initial skepticism of germ theory. During the Crimean War, she found conditions at Scutari Hospital appalling. Soldiers lay on bare floors amid rat infestations and overflowing cesspits. Working with William Farr, she developed revolutionary statistical methods to prove that more soldiers were dying from preventable hospital diseases than from battle wounds. Her polar area diagram, showing monthly mortality rates, became a powerful tool for reform. Dr. John Hall, the Army's chief medical officer, initially resisted her efforts, declaring that the British soldier can survive anything. Yet by implementing basic sanitation, regular cleaning, fresh linens, proper ventilation, she reduced death rates from 42% to 2%. Her notes on hospitals established principles still relevant today. The very first requirement in a hospital is that it should do the sick no harm. Robert Koch's methodical work in the 1870s and 1880s provided irrefutable evidence of germ theory. Working in a makeshift laboratory in Wallstein, Prussia, with a microscope bought by his wife for his 28th birthday, he identified the anthrax bacillus in 1876. His famous demonstration to Paul Ehrlich and other skeptical colleagues in 1882, revealing the tuberculosis bacterium through new staining techniques, marked a turning point. As Rudolf Virchow, previously a critic, admitted, "I have seen it and I have to believe it." Koch's postulates, first presented at the International Medical Congress in London in 1881, established the scientific method for linking specific microorganisms to diseases. The impact was immediate. Within months, physicians worldwide were using his methods to identify new pathogens. The implementation of these discoveries faced significant social and professional resistance. When Sir William Savary, president of the Royal College of Surgeons, declared in 1879 that the carbolic spray is a mistaken and injurious practice, many surgeons abandoned Lister's methods. Progress came gradually through dedicated reformers like Agnes Hunt, who established England's first orthopaedic hospital in Baschurch in 1900, implementing strict antiseptic practices. William Halsted at Johns Hopkins introduced rubber gloves in 1889, initially to protect the hands of his chief nurse and future wife, Caroline Hampton, from harsh antiseptic solutions. The practice spread when his surgical outcomes improved dramatically. By the 1890s, the revolution in medical hygiene was firmly established. The German surgeon Ernst von Bergmann introduced steam sterilization of instruments in 1886, building on the work of Charles Chamberlain at the Pasteur Institute. At Massachusetts General Hospital, the mortality rate for major surgeries fell from 43% in 1870 to 4% by 1896. As William Osler observed in his 1892 textbook, the modern hospital operating room would be unrecognizable to surgeons of just 20 years ago. The transformation extended beyond surgery. In 1889, when Johns Hopkins Hospital opened under William Welch's leadership, Even the building materials were chosen for their ability to be cleaned and disinfected. This fundamental shift in medical practice reflected broader social changes of the Victorian era. The same society that embraced public sanitation and personal cleanliness was ready to accept germ theory. As Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. wrote in 1891, reflecting on the changes he had witnessed, "Science is the topography of ignorance. From a few elevated points we triangulate vast spaces, enclosing infinite unknown details. We cast the lead and draw up a little sand from abysses we may never reach with our dredges." Clean Revolution: How the Victorians Transformed Personal Hygiene. In 1851, as visitors marvelled at the Crystal Palace exhibition in London, few realised they were witnessing the dawn of a hygiene revolution. Among the exhibits was the Refreshing Room, featuring George Jennings' innovative flush toilets, a novelty that would serve 827,280 visitors during the exhibition's run, each paying a penny for the privilege. The Times newspaper reported that many visitors came to the exhibition specifically to experience these water closets, with Queen Victoria herself expressing amazement at the magical disappearance of waste. The civilization of a people can be measured by their domestic and sanitary appliances, Jennings proudly declared, capturing the Victorian spirit of progress through cleanliness. Prince Albert, an enthusiastic supporter of sanitary reform, had personally approved the installation, noting in his diary that proper facilities for cleanliness might help prevent the spread of cholera. The transformation of personal grooming during this era was remarkable. In fashionable London barbershops like Truefitt and Hill, established 1805 and still operating today, gentlemen gathered not just for haircuts, but for the latest society gossip. Their hair was styled with expensive bear grease, genuine Russian bear fat, costing up to 5 shillings an ounce, about a day's wages for a skilled worker. The practice was so common that bear farms were established in England specifically for grease production. The famous diarist Charles Greville recorded in 1848 that no gentleman of quality would be seen in public without his hair properly dressed with bear's grease. By 1850, however, cheaper alternatives emerged, including Macassar oil, immortalized in the anti-Macassar cloths placed on chairs to prevent greasy stains. The popular Rowland's Macassar oil, advertised as containing the rare and unique properties of the Macassar nut, actually contained neither, but was a mixture of coconut oil and flower essences, selling over 50,000 bottles annually by 1840. Hair washing was infrequent, with many following the advice of physician J.C. Atkinson, who in 1867 warned that frequent washing would injure the tone and health of the scalp. Queen Victoria's own hairdresser, Mr. Wheeler, recommended washing the royal hair only once every 3 weeks. Instead, women used powder-based dry shampoos, while the wealthy employed personal maids to brush their hair with 100 strokes nightly, using silver-handled brushes that cost as much as £5, a month's salary for a governess. The practice was immortalized in Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, where the Duchess's cook vigorously brushes the baby with similar motions. The first commercial shampoo, introduced by German hairdresser Charles Kieser in 1890, promised to preserve the natural gloss and color of the hair. Kieser's Berlin salon became so popular that waiting times often exceeded 3 hours, with clients including European royalty. The quest for beauty sometimes proved deadly. Society women used arsenic-based face creams to achieve a fashionable pale complexion, while Dr. Campbell's safe arsenic complexion wafers promised to produce the most lovely complexion that the imagination could desire. The famous beauty writer Harriet Hubbard Eyre exposed these dangers in her 1899 book, A Complete Guide to Beauty, describing how one New York socialite consumed arsenic wafers until her teeth fell out. Lead-based hair dyes and face enamels were equally popular and dangerous. The celebrated beauty Maria Gunning, Countess of Coventry, died at 27 in 1760 from lead poisoning caused by her makeup routine, yet similar products remained popular for decades. The fashionable Bloom of Nignon face powder, advertised in Punch magazine throughout the 1870s, contained enough lead to cause severe neurological damage, while Dr. Mackenzie's arsenic complexion pills were sold until 1901, when they were finally banned after causing 24 documented deaths in London alone. Thomas Crapper, contrary to popular belief, didn't invent the flush toilet, but his improvements and marketing genius helped popularize it. His first patent in 1861 for the floating ballcock revolutionized water flow control. His company's showroom in Chelsea, opened in 1907, featured working displays of toilets, shocking at the time but brilliant advertising. Edward VII, while Prince of Wales, was so impressed during a visit to Crapper's showroom that he appointed the company as sanitary engineers to the royal household in 1891. The water waste preventer, which he patented in 1881, made indoor toilets practical by regulating water flow. By 1900, having a Crapper's valveless waste preventer became a status symbol among the upper classes, with the Rothschild family ordering 30 units for their new country estate at Wadsden Manor in 1889. His competitor, George Jennings, quipped, "The civilization of today exists in direct proportion to the efficiency of its water closets." The democratization of soap marked another significant shift. Before 1850, soap was heavily taxed in Britain, making it a luxury item. A pound of soap cost roughly a third of a working man's weekly wage. William Gladstone's removal of the soap tax in 1853 coincided with William Lever's introduction of sunlight soap in 1884. Lever's Port Sunlight factory in Merseyside became a model industrial village where workers enjoyed unprecedented amenities, including hot running water and private bathrooms. By 1888, it produced 450 tons of soap weekly, while clever advertising linked cleanliness to social mobility. Lever's competitor, Thomas Barrett of Pear's Soap, revolutionized advertising with his famous Bubbles campaign, purchasing Sir John Everett Millais' painting for £2,200, equivalent to £270,000 today, for use in advertisements. The Salvation Army even distributed free soap along with religious tracts, believing that cleanliness is indeed next to godliness. Public baths emerged as social equalizers. Liverpool opened Britain's first public washhouse in 1842, designed by architect James Picton and serving over 1,000 people weekly. By 1896, London boasted 25 public baths, serving over 2 million bathers annually. The pioneering Frederick Furness established the Bell Street Baths in London in 1846, charging 1 penny for a cold bath and 2 pence for hot, prices deliberately set to be affordable for working families. The facility included a conversation room where women could socialize while their laundry dried. In Manchester, industrialist Henry Pochin funded penny baths where working-class families could bathe for a minimal fee. The famous social reformer Lord Shaftesbury noted in his diary in 1851 that "these baths have done more to improve the morals of the working classes than any number of sermons." The rise of indoor plumbing transformed domestic architecture. Architect Thomas Cubitt's designs for Belgravia townhouses in the 1820s included dedicated bathrooms, though most existing homes required significant modification. Queen Victoria's installation of a hot air bath at Osborne House in 1861 helped popularize the concept among the wealthy. The sanitary revolution led to new professions. The plumber became a respected tradesman, while companies like Dalton and Twyford grew wealthy manufacturing bathroom fixtures. Thomas Twyford's Unitas model toilet became the first successful one-piece ceramic toilet, winning a gold medal at the 1882 National Health Society exhibition. By 1900, a fully equipped bathroom could cost £100, equivalent to a year's salary for a middle-class clerk, but as architect Robert Kerr noted in his 1871 book, The Gentleman's House, no gentleman's house is complete without proper bathing facilities. The marketing of hygiene products specifically targeted women as guardians of family health. Pear's Soap's famous 1886 advertisement showing a child in a bath, created by artist John Everett Millais, established cleanliness as a maternal duty. The campaign was so successful that sales increased from 3,000 to 27,000 bars weekly. Women's magazines like The Lady and The Queen regularly featured articles on household hygiene, while Isabella Beeton's influential Book of Household Management devoted entire chapters to personal cleanliness, selling 60,000 copies in its first year. The Women's Sanitary Association, founded in 1857 by social reformer Louisa Twining, distributed pamphlets on hygiene to working-class mothers, reaching over 100,000 homes by 1870. As the century drew to a close, these innovations had fundamentally altered daily life. An 1897 advertisement in the Illustrated London News captured this transformation. The difference between savage and civilized man is the difference between dirty and clean habits. The Victorian obsession with cleanliness, driven by a combination of scientific understanding, social aspiration, and commercial innovation, had established standards of personal hygiene that would influence generations to come. As Florence Nightingale observed in her 1860 Notes on Nursing, "Every nurse ought to be careful to wash her hands very frequently during the day. If her face too, so much the better." This simple yet revolutionary advice marked the beginning of modern hygiene practices. As we delve into the dirt and determination of the Victorian era, we see a world transformed by the struggles for cleanliness and survival. From Florence Nightingale's crusade for sanitary hospitals to Joseph Lister's revolutionary antiseptics, their work reshaped history and saved lives. In the words of Edwin Chadwick, "The greater the dirt, the greater the effort required to remove it." The Victorians may have faced unimaginable filth, but their determination paved the way for modern hygiene. Thank you for joining me on this fascinating journey. Until next time, stay curious and clean. Goodbye.